Welcome to week 4. Hope you all, as Tanya said, had a great weekend. It's amazing to me that things have moved on so swiftly over the last several weeks. And again, I was also very pleased by the feedback and want to join you once again to keep thinking about that in terms of content and conduct of the workshop, as we will be looking at it again and how we might make it a little bit better as we move forward in the future. Also, keep up the momentum that you have shown, which has been terrific, as we keep this ride going and move towards the finish line. Today, we're going to talk about leading peers. We've talked about leading the boss. We talked about leading others. Now, if you see on the cartoon here, we're going to talk about leading peers. This may be, in some ways, the hardest of all directions, or at least periodically the hardest of all directions. Particularly true for young people. Psychologists would tell you that peer groups have an enormous impact on teenagers. So back to our discussion, you might say last week, Gen Z people may be particularly susceptible to peer pressure and the challenges of peer leadership. Each of us, however, work in peer groups periodically, if not at all times. More on that in a second. And must be aware that we are leading or being led by that particular group. At the extreme, it can bring up challenges of ethics as people find themselves caught between loyalty to their peer group versus loyalty to the values and mission of the organization. And also, it struck me as interesting as I thought about this more and refining it for today. We talked about issues of moral courage and leading others, and certainly that's a critical factor here in terms of leading peers. All of you have had experiences or are currently having experiences leading or being led by peer groups. Each one of you, I'm sure, right now or in your past, have served on a committee or working group, as you see here in this cartoon, for your church, a civic group, within your company perhaps, and basically they are painful experiences. I have found in academia that I would much rather have a root canal than serve on an academic committee, but they are very necessary to divine ideas for the future, get broad perspective, and build support to move an organization in the future. So difficult, but useful. The film you see on the right there, 12 Angry Men by Henry Fonda, perhaps is one of the penultimate in art dramatization of the whole problem of peer leadership, because there's probably nothing that is more basic to peer leadership than a jury, which is one of the basis of our legal system, is basically all about peer leadership and dealing with peers. So each one of you have done this or are doing it. This is a particular problem, I would argue, if you are part of a profession. Now, what do I mean by professions? Well, professions are characterized by really 4 groups if you study the sociology of professions. What are those 4 groups? Religious leadership, theologians, the military, those involved in the law and law enforcement, lawyers, cops, etc., and those in the medical profession, not only doctors, but nurses, emergency medical people, anesthesiologists, etc., etc. Professions make this problem, I think, a bit more, can make this problem a bit more acute, because professions, as you see here, are characterized sociologically by 3 things. The work they're doing is expert work. They are focused on a certain body of knowledge, and their job is to continue to develop that body of knowledge in medicine, the law, national security, or religion, and then pass that body of knowledge to the next generation of professionals. The individual in that particular profession is certified by society to conduct that particular activity. Okay, so you are certified by your profession, you swear an oath, a theocratic oath, you pass particular laws, etc., etc., and by observation evaluation, the individual has the moral character to follow this, and it's more than a job. And furthermore, if you violate the norms of that particular profession, you are disbarred, normally by the organization. A theologian is defrocked. Military person is court-martialed. A lawyer loses his license or is disbarred, and the same is true for a doctor or another medical person. So a little bit unique for professions, but not totally. But it's very important in professions that you understand the norms of the profession. And I would argue if you're in one of those, you need to think about that in professional terms, and also the responsibilities I would argue you have as well, slight digression, to continue to develop those in the profession that will follow you, understanding the norms which are key to their interaction with their peer groups. Now, let me be very blunt. You might argue that right now, what we're witnessing in the United States, a lot of the issues that are going on in the streets about social justice were ignited by one incident, which to a degree was all about peer leadership or the lack of peer leadership in a profession and living up to the norms of the profession. Policeman who put his knee on George Floyd's neck, his name was Derek Chauvin. He was a very experienced member of the Minneapolis Police Department, therefore he was professional. He had been on the force for 19 years, but had had 18 complaints about his conduct. That's just facts, that's just history. And he's now been charged with second-degree murder in the death of George Floyd. Obviously, I'm not here to adjudicate Officer Chauvin one way or the other. All I'm saying, he was a professional, but the real problem is the peer problem. Two other officers who were with him that day have been charged as complicit in the death of Mr. Floyd. They were both trainee officers who had only been on the job for a fairly short period of time. So one of the challenges of peer leadership, particularly in professions, is you're expected to maintain the standard for the peer group, even though you may be fairly recent and you're trying to impose those standards on someone who is much more experienced and frankly should know. And that is one of the great difficulties in that particular incident. It's not only what Officer Chauvin did, it's what the two other officers, his peers, didn't do.